So, we resume our program now with an incredible chat between Paul and Greta Thunberg. I think she doesn't need any introduction, but I think it's important to set this conversation in the context that we have today, right? In a world where technology and activism are deeply intertwined. This conversation will try to explore how intersectional solidarity across tech, environment, and human rights can drive meaningful change for Palestine and beyond. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming Paul and Greta on stage.
Amazing having you here. Thank you so much. So I reckon let's just pop right straight into this. You came up in the climate movement. We're talking about Palestine. What's the connection?
Well, in what way are they not? In what ways are they not connected? I would ask. It is the very same values that is driving my activism for the climate, that is driving my activism for other issues like Palestine, social justice in general. I personally became an activist when I was maybe I think 12, and the first protests I went to was for migrant justice, and then I went to some other protests for all kinds of things, because these issues are very much connected. We are fighting against the same system. It is the same system that is exploiting people, that is exploiting nature and the climate. It is a logic that doesn't make any sense, where a very fortunate few people are allowed to exploit the vast majority of the world's population and sacrifice people and planet just for them to keep making profit and maximize geopolitical power. And that is the same logic that we are fighting against, whether we are climate activists, whether we are anti-fascist activists, gender equality activists. And if you are a climate justice activist, I mean, you should not be able to call yourself a climate activist if you are not also fighting for justice for people today. Even if you are so selfish, so incredibly selfish that you are not moved to action to see, for example, Gaza being turned to rubble, by seeing parents looking for their children's body parts on the rubble, even if that doesn't move you to action, how can you expect a world that is allowing this to happen to stand up for you when you need it? And how do you expect that world? And how do you expect that world to take a few steps back and care about ecology? We know we are heading towards a future full of genocides, ecocide, increased inequality, which is what we are seeing. And if we don't make a stand against this, then we are living in a world that has lost all its sense of humanity. And then why should we care about saving the climate? If we are only caring about saving the future for our rich, white, privileged children, but ignore the suffering of the vast majority of people today, if that's not racism, I don't know what is, and that cannot be applied to a climate justice movement. It's just unacceptable, which is why we have to be morally consistent. And then there are also the fact that we know that ecocide and genocide go hand in hand. Environmental destruction is a way of warfare, is a way of oppressing people, which the Palestinians know probably better than anyone. So I don't see how they are not connected.
So one of the interesting things you said in there is and it was sort of tucked away. I think the words you used were a privileged few. And I perceive that this is part of, how you got not exactly cancelled or not exactly deplatformed, but less platformed. Because it's easy for us to say, and everyone loves it, to say that these problems are systemic, right? It's very difficult to do anything about the Middle East conflict, right? These peoples have been fighting forever. Who knows what we can do? And the same way, it's very difficult to do something about rising about rising temperatures and climate change. It's so distributed. It's like we can recycle a bit more. But I perceive that in your activism, you started to name that it's these privileged few. And in our work about Palestine, we start to see there's a very small number of people who have a lot of influence, who are able to make incredible change in the direction that they want to make, but then they hide it behind systemic problems. So I would love to hear more about what you perceive of these privileged few, how they affect the climate movement, the Palestine movement, but also why did naming them or pointing at them as being the problem, how did that cause your activism to be less platformed?
I mean, I think climate activists, and I think most of us in this room in general, are very clear that this is, like, when it comes to, for example, the planet is not dying, it is being killed, and it is being killed by people who have names. And we know who these people are. It is the people often running the multinational corporations, it is politicians, people in media, and of course when we talk about issues like climate, genocide, inequality as a very too big problems, too big to understand, too big for us to influence, that's their biggest currency, because that means that we feel not empowered to do anything. That means that we can't see our role in that, which of course is what they want, because then we won't do anything about it. And there are so many things happening at the same time, so many parts of the world where things are just collapsing, rise of fascism, and which just makes us feel defeated. And if we instead talk about the problems and the people who are causing them, because we can, in most cases, name them, even though they're hiding behind all kinds of things, that makes it much more tangible for us. And I think it's very important that we do that, that we name the companies, we name the CEOs, we name the systems and the countries who are causing it. I know, for example, in Sweden, for example, where I come from, we often say that it's too big for us to tackle, like we're too small of a country. But then when we actually look at Sweden's emissions per capita, we are among the highest in the world when we include all our actual emissions, and we are supplying, we are complicit in the genocide in Palestine, financially, politically, and materially. And also culturally. So I think that has a lot to do with why people don't see their own role in it, because we aren't talking about it as a concrete thing. But I would also love to ask you, how did you come into this movement?
All right. I wrote a blog post, and it went a little viral, and then. But the specific thing, I think that partially made the blog post go viral, is that I named people who in my life were manufacturing consent, and I saw, I was on Twitter, and I saw the genocide being live streamed, and in between were these people that I worked with in tech, who were manufacturing consent. There was a narrative in November 2023 of when the encampments at Columbia started, and it was like, oh, there's anti-Semitism in Columbia University, and then immediately a couple of people that I worked with, that I took their investment, I've been to their houses, had dinner, that sort of thing, were immediately tweeting about that. I was like, oh, I can see what's happening here. I can see that they're directly involved in this. And it's difficult to tell sometimes whether it's like networks, right? Are they doing that because they believe it because of the networks that they're in, or are they doing that because the email arrives from the Israel president's office, which is behind which is where they coordinate a lot of the Hasbara. but that was sort of. I feel that there's a lot of people who react very negatively to. This might be a sort of a neurodivergent thing, but people, we like things to be truth. We don't like being manipulated. We don't like being told what the situation is. We like to understand things, and so that seeing that come down and seeing that happen, I was like, what the fuck is this shit? Like this is how the Holocaust happened, for example. This is how the wars happen. We heard a little bit about that earlier. So that sort of I was angry. I was frustrated, and it just so happened that from the privileged position I had, I was able to do something, start Tech for Palestine, which is not something I imagined when I was writing the blog post. I imagine when you started all this, there wasn't a whole lot of seeing 5-6 years into the future to where it would go.
No, not really. No. But I think what you're saying, you end up in places you don't expect. When I grew up, honestly, I didn't have a clue of what was happening in Palestine. Of course, I was very shielded from that, which to a certain extent, you can hide behind, but we are at a point now where so clearly you cannot use the excuse "I did not know," because we know, and we're seeing a genocide being live streamed on our phones as soon as we open our phones. And for me, that was we have a responsibility, especially since I happen to have a platform which I must use. And during these extremely, extremely decisive years that we are living in, whether it is inequalities, fascism, climate crisis, genocides, what we are doing now is going to determine so much of the rest of, to be frank, human history, because everything more or less is at stake. And if you have a platform, especially if you, as me, happen to belong to one of the demographic groups who are benefiting from today's system, you have a damn responsibility. You are part of these political systems, whether you like it or not. You can either choose to take the side of the oppressor, because there's no neutrality in the face of inequality and genocide, or you can actively take a stand. And I have been so incredibly upset with so-called famous people or people who have a platform, also people in the climate movement, who have been too comfortable to say anything. And if you, as an activist, are being guided what people's perception of you and what is acceptable to say, rather than being morally consistent and applying the values that got you into this activism, and being morally consistent, then why are you even an activist? Then you're just a political pawn.
So I like to say, what's the point of having privilege if you're not going to use it? It's you had this platform, right? People were platforming you. They're writing articles in the New York Times. They'd bring you to the UN. What is it that made you? I mean, maybe the first question is you said you didn't know about Palestine. When did you learn about Palestine, and how did that reach you?
I think it was only a couple of years ago. I knew more and more, but I never had enough time to actually understand it. And I think, of course, when the genocide escalated, that's when I found out more, and that's when I more vocally took a stance, as many people did. Way too few, but still. And as you were saying, at a time everyone here knows, talking about Palestine is often very different from talking about other social justice issues. And I mean, it's I'm far from the only one experiencing this, but it was very much overnight. I was cancelled.
Incredible.
Which was so fascinating, because I kept being invited to events every day when people were like, "Oh yeah, you can come and talk about about things, but don't talk about politics. Don't wear a keffiyeh. Like, what? Don't talk about politics. What do you think activists are doing? Like, how can Palestine be political, but climate not be political? Like, what kind of cognitive cartwheel is that? And
So I love this story. Like I would love to hear more on like the specifics, because we talk in systems and like we're shadow banned and so on. But like talk me through an instance where someone was trying to platform you and then it went awry and because of Palestine.
I mean, all the time, but usually when I got invited to those things, I was like, well, it's either that or nothing. Like you can't pick and choose which human rights to support, and also. But then I just kept going to these events where I thought, like, okay, we need to keep bringing this up. And then when I spoke about it, sometimes I would be dragged off stage. Sometimes
Jesus.
I would sometimes I would just be like, hey, I was brought here to talk about climate, but climate cannot be talked about without also talking about justice in general, and there's a genocide, so that's why I'm going to talk about this instead. And I don't know, you just have to let yourself not be silenced, because that's I mean, as I'm sure all of you here in the audience know, we can't say that we support human rights and then not be morally consistent. And when people are talking about, oh well, we should stick to the facts. What facts? Like the fact that there's a genocide. Even the world's absolute least radical institutions are now saying it's a genocide. Is that not a fact? I don't know. I'm also very autistic, so that might also be a fact.
I feel that lets us tell the truth a little bit more.
We have to be adult enough to handle the truth. But that's also when I started the school strike for climate. I was a child. I was incredibly nerdy, and I was like, I tried to get active in different like movements talking about climate and so on. And I was like, oh, let's do a school strike. Let's tell it how it is, because we can't pretend that everything is fine. And then I tried to make people to join, but I was way too socially awkward to do that. And then what I was met with was adults who were like, no, I've been involved in NGOs for decades and I've studied movements. Being alarmists is never good. You always end up losing people, and people lose hope and they just go into apathy. And let's do let's have a picnic, be inspirational, talk about motivating each other. And I was so angry. I was like, you guys have clearly not understood these crises. This is not something that you can like on social media. I'm gonna do this whether you like it or not. You are welcome to join, but I'm not gonna adapt this message, because we have to tell the truth. We have to be adult enough to tell the truth. Otherwise, people are just kind of living in this false sense of hope where they're not doing anything because they think someone else is taking care of it. And that's how I entered activism. So we have to not adapt our message to whatever is most convenient, but tell the truth. And that's why I'm so glad that you guys are also doing.
So it's funny, you mentioned your autism and your bipolar diagnosis. I don't know if I'm the only one to notice this, but the movement is heavily neurodiverse.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
I would say it's like 5 times as neurodiverse as like the regular population. I'm constantly in meetings. I mentioned like, oh, I have ADHD, and they're like, oh, me too. And then we share like, our systems for coping and that sort of shit. I also noticed everyone has cats. Does anyone notice? Has anyone noticed this? There's like no dogs. Everyone has cats. Just my own observation. So at some point, you're telling these stories, all right? And we talk about Palestine, but we actually have to talk about Israel, right? The problem is not that like mysterious oppression descends from nowhere to oppress Palestine. It's that a country, a specific people, governments, army. Specific people are doing an occupation, ethnic cleansing, apartheid. Those are sort of like high-level words, but ultimately, humans and a system of humans that are in Israel are killing, murdering, torturing, etc. People, and that's the naming that we have to do, right? It's you mentioned naming CEOs of corporations that are causing the climate crisis. Well, we can name, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, for example, was directly involved in the surveillance of mass surveillance of Palestinians, in providing the sort of AI that has been used to conduct the mass bombing at the start of the 2023 genocide. All right, we're naming Israel. When did you start naming Israel? Why did you take that why did you take that turn?
I mean, of course. Why wouldn't I? I don't remember, but as important I think it is that we name Israel and directly call them out for their blatant human rights violations, which has been going on for many, many decades, as we know. It's also, I would say, as important to name those who are enabling and fueling the genocide, which is our own governments, our own institutions, our own companies, that are supposed to represent us. And I think we are seeing, as we are all doing here, the civil societies are trying to act to compensate for the inactions of our government and institutions who are failing to uphold even the basic human rights and failing to act in line with international law. Because according to international law, states have a legal obligation to act even when there's a risk of genocide. That means ending arms transfers, cutting ties, imposing sanctions, which they are embarrassingly much failing to do. And unfortunately, as well as when it comes to the climate crisis and so many other crises that we are facing, it falls on us to be the adults in the room and to compensate for their inaction. So it's important to name them too, and to make clear where this complicity is happening, whether it's funding, whether it's whitewashing, pinkwashing, whether it's just political legitimization of Israel's genocide.
So I love the concept of naming, because it's very easy to say, the Irish government isn't doing what it should be to pass the Occupied Territories Act or something along those lines. But it's another thing to say Micheál Martin, right, who is an Irish politician who represents a country who are fully pro-Palestine and is deliberately dragging his heels, right? That is a specific person who's doing it. You're from Sweden. Who in Sweden is the person that you think is fucking this up?
If I'm going to start naming people, we're going to have to be here all day, I'm afraid. But of course, our Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson. Yeah. Our Vice Prime Minister, Ebba Busch, Vice Prime Minister of Sweden has said Israel is doing the world a favor.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course, Elbit Systems also are operating in Sweden. Spotify, a big company that we should boycott, and things like that. Daniel Ek, who is the founder of that, if we're naming people. Mm-hmm. But I like even the very, very top. Also, Jimmy Åkesson, of course. I don't know if any of you guys know who these people are, but memorize. But yeah, there are countless, and people see Sweden as a kind of progressive, sustainable country who is like fighting for human rights. Well, that picture is at least 50 years outdated. Now, as I said, representatives of our government are saying that Israel is doing the world a favor, and they are defending Israel. They are sending weapons to Israel. They're sending money to Israel, and our institutions are still collaborating with Israel. So, yeah, Sweden has a lot to do as well.
Shocking. The Irish government as well, and as we've learned a lot today, the EU massively complicit in the genocide of Palestine. Greta Thunberg, thank you so much for coming to speak to us.
Thank you.